So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Morris. I'm Director of Health Data Research UK. It's my pleasure to be co-chairing this session with Emily Jefferson, who's known to many of you. We've got a great session, three very distinguished national and international speakers, and they're going to address the exam question. What does the future look like? What do national and international health data researchers need in a post-COVID-19 world? So the way we're going to do this is we're going to have three very pithy presentations, leaving lots of time for discussion at the end. Please put your questions in the Q&A. The chat is also monitored and we'll try and scan that. But let's put in some really testing questions. So we're going to kick off today with Jerry Riley, who is known to many of you, is Chief Technology Officer at Health Data Research UK. Started his life looking at helicopter health diagnostics. So he's come on a long way. So Jerry, take us away. Tell us about the future.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Next slide, please. Right, okay, so what I wanted to do this afternoon was just to take you through a very rapid view of what we're doing with the Health Data Research Innovation Gateway. We started the Innovation Gateway project as an MVP at the back end of last year with the objective of running over several years, building out an infrastructure that can be a portal onto the health data in the UK, with the objectives of improving visibility on that health data, of making radical improvements to the access request journey, both for the benefit of researchers and innovators as well as the data custodians, through integration into trusted research environments, which my colleague Tim will talk about shortly, and give an end-to-end visibility to how health data is used and to improve the ability for researchers and innovators to make really creative use, but ethical and beneficial use of health data across the UK. So we created an MVP over the back end of last year. That became available in January this year. In the early part of this year, we went through a selection process to identify a development partner to work with us on the next stage of development. And at the very end of April, 27th of April this year, we started that second stage of development, which will roll through to a first milestone in October. However, we're not waiting till October to make the early stages of the gateway available, because we want to get feedback, we want to get collaboration. So we're doing this in the open, everything's open source. And we're doing that development so you can see and contribute to that development. So next slide, please. And I'm going to now switch. So what I want to do is I'm the one who takes the risk here and attempts to do a live demo. So we are literally 5 weeks into the project at this point. So we've started to build out in the open the Innovation Gateway. So what I want to do now is just give you a quick overview, and you can go and play and explore later on. So the gateway is accessed at healthdatagateway.org. And as you can see on the landing page, this will give the search, which will search across the metadata representing 454 data sets from the UK, as well as tools, projects, and people. We've extended the concept to not just be data sets. It has shortcuts through to some of the common areas we expect people to want to explore. You can see what people have been recently searching, what's been popular, what's been recently updated. So what I would like to do to start with, this is a COVID-19 event. So we have grouped together some of the COVID-19 resources. So I will just click through to these resources. And on this page, you can see the data sets that are represented within the gateway, the papers and preprints that have come out of our HDR UK community, the research questions that have been coming through our prioritization process feeding into Sage, and also the tools. So we've grouped together resources around COVID-19, given the critical nature of the work that's going on. But actually, one of the capabilities we'll be adding into the gateway in the next couple of weeks will be the function to support groupings of assets together, both temporarily, but also to create community around particular data sets, tools, and assets. So let's now do let's pick a nice simple search. We'll stay on the COVID-19 theme. So we'll do a search. This will draw up the data sets, tools, projects, and people associated with the search. So you can see the data sets, the tools, projects, and people. So if we come back to the tools just for a moment, we are adding in capability to filter. So if I wanted to filter down on, say, data visualization, I can pick the filters on the side, which are adaptive, and will give you an opportunity to filter down, because as we add more data sets here, this is going to become a richer set and you're going to need filtering capability. So let's now have a look at a data set. So if we pick a data set, we can see some of the summary technical metadata around the data set. We're representing the data sets in the gateway. We're not a repository for the data. That data still sits very safely with the data custodians. So we can see the information on the data set. We can even see, as of actually today, a representation of the state of the metadata. So this is a platinum quality, which means this has got a very rich set of technical as well as summary metadata. If you want to go down to the details of the data set, you can track down into the metadata catalog, which will give a very detailed view of the metadata. From this page, it's also possible to request access to the data set. At this point, this is a very simple form and is really an inquiry form out to the data custodian. But we are currently working very closely with the members of the UK Health Data Research Alliance to build out a very flexible and customizable approach to providing access request management through the gateway, with dashboards to show and track that access request management and the metrics around it so we can drive improvement based on the 5 safes model that Tim will talk about in a little while around the TREs. So to request access, you need to be logged in. I have logged in earlier, so I would just request access, fill in, and this will go off to the data custodian at the moment as an email. You can log in through LinkedIn, through Google, or through an Open Athens account. So let me quickly pop over to my account. So when you log in the first time, you will be asked to fill out a profile, because we want to be able to have some insight into how the gateway is being used. And login capabilities only required for the advanced functions. There is anonymous search for the simple capability, but also being logged into your account, you will get notification of updates to tools, projects, data sets. So I can see here that the Calibre Health Data Records Research Toolkit has been updated and improved. I will see the projects, I'll see tools, and I'll see the reviews. You have an ability to comment and review the data sets, the tools and projects. So for example, if you can see the tools that I'm a collaborator on, but also this is where you can add a new tool, because one of the things we want, I don't want this to just be a HDR UK asset, I want this to be a community asset. So we want you adding your tools and resources. So there's a nice simple approach to adding tools, license information, who can update the tools, but also this will be keyword driven. So there's keywords, or if there's new keywords, you can just type and these will create new keywords into the system to support the search and discovery functionality. So finally, I just want to quickly go back. At any stage, you can go back through to the Health Data Research Innovation Gateway logo to get back to the front. I just want to highlight something we're starting to build out within the gateway and will be enhancing over the next few releases. So one of the things we want to do is we want this to be more than just a place you go to search and discover data sets or request access. We want this to be a place where you collaborate around health data research, and where researchers, data custodians, and the public can go to engage with other members of the community. So we have built in discourse, and this will be more tightly integrated over the next couple of releases, so that we can have a discussion across the community of topics of interest, ideas around tools, ideas around data sets, so that we can make this an engaging environment to improve the experience of health data research within the UK. So with that, this is just a very start to what we're doing. As I said, we are only 5 weeks into this stage of the project. We will be building out from here over the coming weeks and months. So we want to encourage everybody to go out there, try the gateway, provide us feedback, add to the community and add to the tools, and really make this a great portal for the UK health data research community. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing. So Hetty, can you take share and bring up the next slide for me? Okay. So as I said, this is just the beginning of the journey. We're a few weeks in. This is a 2-year journey. So over the next few weeks, we will be adding some new capabilities. So we are building out the access request management capability that will start to surface in about the next month. So we'd love to see comments and feedback on that. We will be looking at gap analysis, looking at those searches which don't bring up data sets, which will give us great insight into where there's new opportunity for data sets. We're going to be looking at some cohort building capability and integration into trusted research environments. So we have a very ambitious plan. It is agile. It will change as we see new opportunity, as we see new requirements, but we really want the feedback and the engagement with the tools, because we want this to be driven by the community, because that's the way we'll make this of most value. And with that, I will hand back to Hetty to pass on to the next speaker.
So, Jerry, terrific. And thank you to you and a vast team that's developed that in the open. So thank you. And the first live demo I've seen work for years. So feather in your cap. So this morning, colleagues may have heard me express with a great sense of excitement our partnership with the COVID-19 Therapeutics Accelerator that's convened by the Gates Foundation and Wellcome. And we're delighted to welcome Steve Kern here today, who's Deputy Director of Quantitative Sciences at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who's going to talk about international frameworks for collaboration. He also gets the prize for the best dressed speaker today because he's got a jacket on. So thanks for that. And it's 7 a.m. in Seattle, so thank you for getting up early. So Steve.
Great, thank you, Andrew, for having me, and good afternoon to most of you. Good morning for me. Yeah, it's nice actually to be able to wear a jacket for a change and not have to just wear a t-shirt every day, which has kind of become the new norm. So I'm going to talk to you just briefly today about how we might be working on expanding the great work that HDR UK has done across the UK in terms of data sharing into a global international effort. And I purposely chose this slide. We have a series of pictures of Bill and Melinda Gates working across the globe. And I particularly chose this one when I talk about data sharing, because that you see what Bill's doing, he's getting handed a board. I think that's, some days the way I feel that data sharing is working in the global health space. It's quite old, it's quite antiquated, I'm sorry, and not really efficient. So if we could go on to the next slide. So COVID gives us an interesting opportunity. There we go. Because it is creating a global health emergency. And emergencies can be effective catalysts for trying to do new things, but I would not say that they're not necessarily efficient catalysts. And so that's one of the challenges I think that we're dealing with. This is actually from an article that Bill Gates had published in New England Journal of Medicine in 2015 after Ebola. And one of the things that we wanted to learn from Ebola was how could we respond more effectively, more efficiently to some of these global health challenges. And important components were to build on a strengthened non-emergency system. By that I mean trying to essentially accelerate something that already exists rather than construct it from anew in the midst of a crisis. So we do that, we have to develop infrastructure that's efficient, that can be mobilized and scalable, and then use it actually on a regular basis. So one of the things that I've been finding very attractive as I've learned about HDR UK and the efforts that have been going on across your community has been the sense that you have this developed infrastructure, it is efficient, it is scalable, and it's time actually for an opportunity to do that. And so one of the things we're really working forward with as part of the Therapeutic Accelerator is to look at how we can take the principles of what HDR UK has done and create a global effort around COVID as the catalyst. But I want to say that it's not only for COVID. In the end, as we wind down at some point in the future, our capabilities or needs actually to respond to COVID, what we want to leave in place is a great infrastructure that then can be continued to be used to help in global health questions writ large that the community is trying to solve together. And I say that as one of the lessons we did learn from Ebola is how to do that well in vaccines. And you see that post the Ebola outbreak in Western Africa in 2015, you saw actually the creation of CEPI as a global collaborative effort to develop vaccines. And I think right now, one of the successes of CEPI is that there are multiple candidates that have been rapidly made available, at least into early clinical trials, and hopefully one of them will come forward as a successful candidate, at least one of them. I imagine that many of them will for COVID. And so we want to actually then take that idea and extend it into therapeutics, extend it into diagnostics, extend it into systems analysis, if you will, for emergencies. And a solid infrastructure for sharing data would serve all of those efforts in an effective way. In fact, I would argue that without that, many of those efforts will not be able to be effective or efficient. So let's go to the next slide, if we could. So many of you maybe have heard me speak before on these issues. I've been working on data integration in global health since the time I started in the Gates Foundation in 2013. And so I apologize if I'm sounding a little bit like a broken record. But one of the things that I've loved as I've listened to conversations both with HDR UK and also even today is changing the conversation from data ownership to data stewardship. I just heard Jerry mention the term custodians. That is so refreshing to me because one of the biggest impediments that I've found in the global health space in terms of getting people to share data is a sense of ownership, that an individual investigator, an individual researcher has a sense of ownership. And as an academic researcher myself, I understand that idea because you put a lot of hard work into collecting data. You've done it perhaps at very difficult, challenging situations. And so there is some sense that you own something that's contributed to it. But I think if we think more of ourselves as stewards, because we are collecting that data as an observation of things, of others, of existing situations in the world, then the way we use it, the way we approach using it just changes. And I think that's a fundamental component that it's really been exciting to hear and to see in HDR UK that I'm sure is actually helping your effectiveness in terms of collaboration. We also want to change then the expectation that goes with that. Right now in the global health space, most of the ideas around sharing data to help inform decisions are an opt-in activity. And I think it's time that we globally change this to an opt-out activity. That is, if we change the expectation so that people anticipate that I'm going to share data and opt out when it's inappropriate or has to be constrained, which does exist. There are reasons why you would need to opt out. But if we make the default situation opt in, build the structure and the infrastructure to be able to facilitate that, then I think we'll be able to make huge progress in our opportunity to extend some of the integration work that you've done effectively in the UK to a broader global platform. And then changing the operation, again, it's difficult, if not impossible, to initiate new things, new structures in the middle of a crisis. It's very challenging to do. But instead, if we're accelerating existing activity, things that we're already doing on a regular basis, and amplifying them, using the crisis as an opportunity to enhance and to expand the capability, then I think that it gives us a good opportunity for success. If we go to the next slide. So here, what we're trying to avoid is what Trevor Mundell, who's our president of Global Health, calls the archipelago of data islands. That there are these islands of data that exist throughout the world. And particularly in global health, those islands are characterized by these kinds of features. They often have lots of missing data. They may be of poor quality. They are siloed, as we said. They're oftentimes redundant, which is really a challenge and really a waste if you think about it. Because if we collect the same variables over and over again without sharing them, we miss an opportunity to build on each other's work. And then as a consequence, they're underutilized because of all those capabilities. So this is what I to deal with normally in my everyday life. And what we're trying to do is essentially create the opportunities to bridge these archipelagos and to essentially gain the insight that can come from these data islands. If you think about the number of trials that were launched in the first few months of the COVID pandemic, right? Many of them are likely to be under-enrolled and consequently, uninformative, unless we can find some way to efficiently integrate them. And to do that, that's going to be actually a key element that something like a collaborative data workspace can pull together with the right people and the right talent. Let's go on to the next slide. So this integration is a real key component. Normally, this is actually an animated slide, but I didn't want to dare test the capabilities of sending a large animation. Jerry was braver than I by doing a live demo. But in essence, this is what you're trying to do by creating a collaborative workspace, as HDR UK has done across your different areas, and as we're trying to do now in the COVID space. So how do we enable the value of those archipelagos to really be bridged and really to be impactful in decision making? I think Recovery, the trial in the UK, is a great example of where you could benefit from that kind of information. As we're learning from Recovery, because it's an adaptive platform, of what arms don't appear to be having benefit and are dropped, that becomes information that helps inform the next set of trials that will come forward, or the next set of arms that can go into platform trials. And that's clearly the kind of integration and knowledge sharing that we need to have. It's not so that another country should go and repeat the great work that Martin Landry and their team have done in Recovery to get that trial off the ground, but actually pick up from where Recovery has left off and learned and carry the ball a little bit further. Unless we do that, we'll constantly be behind COVID-19 in any of our research efforts as we go forward. So in the last slide, our hope then is, coming out of this pandemic, we use it as an opportunity to create essentially this integrated world of data, right? So essentially taking those archipelagos, which look like dots on this map of the globe, and connecting them with a network that is enabled by collaborative people who want to share data, who want to inform questions that then help solve global problems. The key to doing this, which I think HDR UK has done quite well, and we hope to be able to catalyze in our collaboration with you, is build on trust. Because without the trust of the network to be able to do this effectively, to do this safely, and to do this fairly, you won't get the cooperation that's desperately needed to help this global situation. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Hedy. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Terrific. So we're precisely on time. Keep your questions coming in. There's lots on the chat and in the Q&A, so that's great. So the finale on this session is our old friend Tim Hubbard, who, as you know, is Professor of Bioinformatics at King's College, but also deeply integrated with Genomics England, as well as, I think he sort of cut his teeth on the Human Genome Project, which is arguably the best example of open science and data sharing in human history. So Tim's been doing a great leadership role in thinking around what are the attributes of a trusted research environment. So Tim, take us away.
Thank you, Andrew. So yeah, so next slide. So this is part of the work streams in the Health Data Research Alliance. And as Andrew said, you've probably heard the word trusted research environment come up throughout the talks today. Open safely, variety of different, the SAIL infrastructure, these are all described as trusted research environments. And so the reason for this work stream is to try and define what that is and use that to build stronger trust in the way data is used. And I say data is used rather than sharing. I think the word sharing has now become the kind of word we can't really use because it implies to the public data moving around, and they've seen their own data in Facebook move somewhere else to another organization without them knowing about it. And so people are now quite allergic to the idea of data movement. If you look at things like Open Safely, the whole principle behind that is the data stays where it is and you do the analytics in place. So next slide. So this is really the summary of the principles that the Alliance adopts in order to implement this TRE type concept, adopts the ONS 5 safes definition. And central to this is this idea that you don't distribute individual level data anymore. You do all the processing inside a closed environment, which is described in the SAFES terminology as the safe setting. And that's the new way of working. Now, it might seem like something that's difficult to implement, but in fact, there's multiple examples of TREs operating in this way, as we saw today, and I'll describe the genomic signal in an example. And the reason for doing this is because it is more difficult to implement, is that public is highly sensitized to these issues about health data. We've heard, for example, talks about this being a special case right now with COVID, that rules are being slightly relaxed to speed things up. But there's also a clear comment, Effie talked about this morning, that we shouldn't use this to reduce our standards for ensuring data privacy. If we do that, we'll lose trust. And so moving to this kind of strong framework is a way to reset public confidence. Next slide. So these are the 5 safes: safe people and safe projects. Those are pretty standard. That's what people have been operating in terms of research over sensitive data for a long time. The difference comes in the third one. As soon as you stop distributing data, you've then got to think about the next one, which is safe outputs. If you can't distribute the data, you then have to have a strong mechanism for deciding what extracts you can allow in terms of summaries, because you're going to have to publish statistics in journals. What is it safe to allow out as results, and only results, out of that environment? And then, of course, you've also got to think about, even if it's a controlled environment, what is safe data to put in that environment in terms of de-identification, because people are still going to log into that environment and work inside it. Next slide. So I just want to go through some of the differences between what has been used historically in this area for our distribution. Normally what happens, you want to access a sensitive data set, you send an access request, it gets reviewed, and then somebody controlling that in a safe setting creates an anonymized data set for you specifically, and you get to download that and run analysis on your own system. Now, what are the problems with that? Well, firstly, the data custodian loses control of the data. As a result, as Ben Goldacre said, you can't completely guarantee anonymity. Those kind of examples can be re-identified, and you get a lack of public trust. And there are cases where people get re-identified from such data sets. And of course, now we have some particular types of data, such as genomic data, which you can't do anything other than de-identify. There's no way you can pseudonymize a genome without losing the information that's contained in it. We don't know. Every base can do something. We can't change anything if we're trying to, reduce the information. It also means that under things like GDPR, having a copy of some data which is sensitive on your own system, your computer system or your university system, suddenly has become a liability rather than an asset. Because can you guarantee that your security on your system is good enough to stop somebody else breaking into it and taking that data away? It becomes a liability. And then from the point of view of funding agencies, there's just the cost of storing, maintaining lots and lots of copies of large data sets. And we're talking about increasingly large data sets. The genomic signal data set's 20 petabytes. Once you get into large genomes or large image sets, actually moving them around becomes very difficult to do. Next slide. So if you compare that with this model of non-distribution, access is pretty much the same. You have to apply for access and get reviewed, but then you log into an environment and you do your analysis in there. And actually that gives you some freedom, because you don't have to have this very narrow slice of data exported just for you. Because you're in a controlled environment and you've signed up to, you're kind of under a legal agreement not to re-identify people, it's possible to allow you to see a wider selection of data and carry out more broad, with many more phenotypes than you might get if you were only being allowed a slice to be exported. Then when you've done your analysis, It's the summary that you get to take out, not the original data. So the benefits of this are obviously data custodian retains control of the data, retains public trust. You move the privacy control from the individual to the summary data. And from the point of view of funding agencies, this means only one copy. It means that you can spend money on securing that one copy, less on worrying about multiple copies and the costs of maintaining them. Now, this used to be a difficult thing to do, but technological advances makes that possible now. Virtualization makes it possible to bring algorithms to an environment where you can carry out analysis. Cloud computing makes the provision of scalable computing possible. Next slide. So this is just an example work through, show you how we've set things up in Genomics England. It's an unusual environment because it actually provides, the data is also for clinical care. So there's a cycle shown in blue for the clinical care cycle. All the data is held in one data center. There's one side which handles the apps that do clinical care, and then the other side is for research. And anything identifiable is de-identified before it moves to the other side for the research purposes. But this is a closed system. You can only, as researchers, access this through a virtual desktop interface where you can't see the internet, but you do have a full high-performance computing environment. So if you think of the 5 safes, click please, thank you, safe people. That's how you vet the researchers that go into there, and their institutions have to sign as well as researchers. Next click. The Access Review Committee, which includes the public and participants, reviews the projects. Next click. You've got the safe setting in the middle, which is the secure environment. Next click. You have this airlock, which enforces export of only summaries. There's actually a committee which reviews those requests, as well as somebody full-time managing it. Next click. And then the safe data model of making sure that everything is processed in a way that the data going into the area for researchers is de-identified. Next click. Now, of course, there's an issue about how can you scale this? Can you scale it enough to cope with, if you've got thousands of researchers, Genomics England's got 3,000 already, can you provide enough HPC? Well, in a modern environment, yes, you can, because if you can break out into the public cloud, you can make it infinitely scalable. The only questions then is, how do you implement that in a way where the public cloud is trustable? It cannot see the data. But there's a lot of work on this. The public cloud providers actually want to be trusted. They want to make the security good enough that they can't see the data. And if you have those controls, then it's safe to do that. Next click. And finally, there's a possibility in this particular setting, we've got clinical care and research next to each other, where you might be able to send messages from the researchers over the fence to clinicians and actually bring the clinical world of treatment and the research world much closer together. Next slide. So you can read about this. There's a lot of detail in this green paper, which you can go and download. Next slide. And we've had a consultation on that that's been running. We've got a wide range of responses, a lot of detail in those, and the paper is going to be revised to take that into account and address some issues. But I think one thing I just want to close with is concern of academics and researchers is this environment. You force me to do work inside this environment. This is actually harder for me to do. How can you guarantee that this environment is as easy for me to use as having it on my own computer? And so that's an important area. And certainly this business about scalability has been an issue. We built the Genomics England environment 6 years ago using private cloud and a fixed HPC. And we get these questions, well, I want to run AI and I need GPUs and things like that. So because of COVID, you'll have heard Mark Caulfield talk earlier about the COVID project, so sequencing 35,000 new genomes for COVID. We're actually going to use this as a chance to build a specific environment using cloud now that the cloud has matured in terms of its security and scalability, and to provide an environment with a more flexible arrangement for scalability and bringing your algorithms and having your own little slice within our walls, within our controlled environment, where you can bring your virtual machines and have as many CPUs as you can pay for within a cloud compute environment. So we're moving to the sort of next stage of making it as easy as running and scaling your compute as it could be on your own systems. So those are just one of the sort of areas we're addressing in these next phases. And you've seen things like when Goldacre's open safely, similarly using these newer technologies of packaging software and bringing things to data in other environments, carrying out that sort of scalable analysis. So I'll stop there and go for these questions. Thank you.
Terrific. Tim, thank you. So I'm now going to invite Emily to pick up the baton and moderate the discussion. We've had some great questions already. So Emily.
Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for some really fascinating talks there. So I'd like to ask all of the members of the audience to put some questions on the question and answer online system so that we can go through some of them. So there's already a few questions about the number of safe havens that or trusted research environments that we might have across the UK, and whether there's a natural limit to the number of environments. What are your thoughts on that, please, Tim?
So I think that, you know, this all sits underneath Jerry's structure, the kind of natural set we've got a certain number of alliance participants. You know, maybe they'll all bring their own TRE, but we do have some providers like Swansea, which is actually offering to provide a TRE out of the box, essentially, for if you've got particularly if you've got a cohort, which might be under different conditions anyway, put it into that environment and they'll spin one up for you rather than having lots. But we're going to have big providers like NHS Digital, which is essentially producing something like this. And then we have the hubs, which each are going to end up with a TRE. I think the key thing, though, in the future, once you've got that structure, is federating between them. Because if you can't move data between them, can you do queries across them? But then in the long term or medium term, if the TREs are if they've all been vetted to the same level, and I'm talking about vetting, I'm not talking about self-certification here. One of the things in the green paper is how do you set up an agency that does this security audit and security engineering assessment? If you've reached some standard of accreditation, then maybe slices of data can move between the TREs because they can be seen as equivalent in terms of standards of security.
Thank you. And there's another follow-on question for you, Tim, around reproducibility of research. So somebody within the environment creates some code, and they're wanting to then share that with others. But how do we go about exporting that, and is this hampering scientific reproducibility? So
in the gel environment, suddenly you can take code in and you can take code. Well, you can export code. That's allowed as long as it's checked. Though generally you're only really allowed to do development outside and bring it in. So it can be open code outside that's brought in.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking. Has anybody else got any more questions? Maybe for Jerry or Steve? Just scrolling through the questions here.
There's a reproducibility question.
Yeah, and there was one question, Emily, I wanted to address that was asked about the funder's role actually in helping to create data and make it more open, from David Sebald at Iridia. And I think it's a great question. And one of the things you'll see is, so first, funders are working together in much more collaborative ways. The Therapeutic Drug Accelerator that I'm part of is a collaboration now, initiated by Wellcome, Gates, the MasterCard, and Chan Zuckerberg together, now adding Dell, Minderoo Foundation from Australia, a number of other foundations who are joining efforts. And one of the things that we all share is this idea and this concept that data that comes out of the investments that we're making should be available for people to learn from, should be a reusable asset that others can benefit from, because that's the only way that the investment outlasts the time that we're spending on it right now. And so we really have a big motivation to try to do that. We are requiring that in some form. But one of the things we've learned is that just making a blank requirement of data needs to be open without facilitating its capability to do so in an effective way is actually a useless request. And so we're really working to help facilitate and fund the creation of networks like this one so that it actually can support a better open data sharing environment.
Yeah, I should say on the business of, if a funder funds a data set, I mean, that's a cohort. If the consents are, allow data to move around, then it can move around. The foundation for HDR is largely around, if you want to do the kind of stuff that's been done across whole health systems, where these are not research participants, they're people in a health system, then you have different rules. And that's where this level of security and trust becomes important. And it's a different kind of world. And, we do need to federate information across the world between health systems, but I don't think any country is going to allow data from their health system to move across boundaries.
So that's a very good point there, Tim, and kind of leads me on to the last question, which I think is applicable for all of the panelists, and I'd like to ask you all around international data sharing. So obviously we're talking about HDR UK and sharing all of the cohorts and the data that we have here, but what about sharing internationally? How do we go about supporting that as a community? I'll hand over to Jerry here.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. So the first thing I'd like to say is one of the reasons we are pushing forward with Gateway is around transparency. It's to have to support researchers and innovators and data custodians, but also to be much more transparent to the public around how data is being used in a way that ultimately will be able to link usage of data, research, sort of searches for data, discovery of data through to outputs, not just academic papers, but to changes in treatment pathways so that you've got an end-to-end view of how health data is being used. What we're not trying to do is in any way undermine the absolutely critical controls over the use of sensitive health data. So as we build out the gateway, those controls still sit with the data custodians. So we're going to look to improve the story, but the controls will sit with the data custodians as they make a decision on whether a particular access request, be it from a UK health requester or from an international request, whether that meets the requirements of ethics and safety and benefit to the UK patients and public. So we want to drive international collaboration. We want to drive transparency, but we also want to drive that in a way that meets with the UK's high bar on ethics.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And any thoughts on this point, Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I mean, I think that what Jerry mentioned is exactly the right perspective. And the sort of the motto that our team has started to take on is this idea of always fair, sometimes open. So, the data can stay where the data is. We need to know what's there. And if we know what's located in different locations, then we can go about the proper processes for ensuring that you have safe access to it and it can be made available. I think that's one of the real strengths of a federated approach. You can move the algorithms to the data instead of moving the data to the algorithms. And so I think then if you're a holder of data in a country, then you at the very least get to reflect on how does your data and analysis look relative to what others are seeing across the world. And that in itself is a valuable thing because it might help you guide your own internal policies. And then as you get more comfortable with the idea, how do you share it, make your view more available to others to learn from as well?
Yeah.
Fantastic. New hashtag there, always fair, sometimes open. I like that idea. And over to you, Tim, to finish.
Yes, so I agree with that. And the business about having standards across the world, at least so that you can do this kind of federated querying or comparing summaries. Of course, there are organizations for that, like the Global Alliance for Genomes and Health, in this space at least, which has been working on standards. And then there are open things like OMOP as standards for clinical data. So we need to have those side of things so we can actually share information more effectively across systems. so data is comparable. That's perfectly fits with this crisis. It's a global crisis, and the data everywhere, it can be more useful if it's comparable.
Fantastic. So that's a great note to finish on, and I'd like to thank all of our fantastic speakers today for this session, and enjoy the rest of the day. Andrew, do you want to finish off at all?
Well, I think we've got 5 more minutes, actually. Is that right?
Oh, we finished at 3:35. My apologies.
Yeah.
Let's have some more questions.
3:35.
Have we got time for one more question? So Jerry, there's 3 questions for you. When can we use the gateway? How do I publish my tools? Is there a license? And what's the smallest data set you're interested in? There we go.
So I'm glad I can count. So the first one, when can you use the gateway? Now. So as I said, we're going to evolve this in the open. It is going to change a lot, but it is out there and available at healthdatagateway.org now. So go out there, you can use it, you can search on the data sets, you can contribute questions, you can contribute tools at this point. So it's available and out there now. So if you register on the gateway, then you will have the ability to add tools and projects. So if you put a profile, if you log into the gateway, create a profile, you will see under your account the ability to see what tools you're associated with, and there is an add tools button there to simply add a tool. And it adds it as a link. We're not acting as a tools repository, we're acting effectively as a registry out to tools. Everything that's added goes through moderation, so we will be keeping an eye so that we don't end up with inappropriate content, but we want to really build up the amount of information there and to grow that. There is no license and there is no charge for using the gateway. So the gateway's there. We want it to be a community resource. Andrew, what was the 4th one of the 3 questions you asked?
The size of data set.
No limit on the size of data set. We hold within the gateway metadata rather than the data set. So there is a specification for the metadata so that we can drive off how we do search and discovery. So there is no limit to the size or modality of the data set, providing we can represent it through the metadata.
Right. Okay. We've had a terrific session. And I think a key issue here is openness. And Paul Clark this morning really recommend that session 2. One of his quotes was around ontologies and standards. No one owns them. Everybody uses them. So I quite like it. It sort of captures what we're trying to do. So I think we've had a terrific session. Emily, thank you. And Tim, Steve and Jerry, thank you. Great session. So I think we've got a 10-minute break and then we move into our fireside chat, our second plenary of the day with Amy Abernethy, and we're hugely fortunate to have her supporting HDR UK. So go and make a cup of tea and see you in 10 minutes. So thank you everyone and see you soon.